The estate had grown quieter with the passing years, the once vibrant heart of the household now beating with a hollow echo. Since the death of Chief John Parker, the house no longer stood as a symbol of power and pride. Its walls, though still grand, held an air of heavy silence. Emily Parker, the only daughter left under the roof of her stepmother, Sophia Brooks, moved through the kitchen with mechanical grace, her hands peeling yams for breakfast, when the bell rang sharply, interrupting her thoughts. Sophia's voice followed, commanding yet distant. "Emily, someone is at the gate. Go and see who it is." With a sigh, Emily wiped her hands and made her way to the front gate. When she saw the man standing there, a strange familiarity hit her. It was Jack Matthews. She hadn't seen him in years. The son of her late father's closest business partner, Jack had once been the embodiment of youthful confidence and promise. Now he stood before her, a far cry from the man she remembered. His clothes were worn, his eyes tired, and his backpack hung loosely from his shoulder, dusted from travel. Emily paused, recognition flickering in her gaze as she opened the gate. "Good morning, Jack," she said, offering a polite but distant greeting. He managed a small, tired smile. "Good morning? Is Sophia around?" Without a word, Emily nodded and gestured for him to enter. Inside, Sophia sat as always in her brown leather chair, one leg crossed, a cup of tea resting on the table beside her. Her gaze flicked up with a hint of surprise as Jack walked in. "Well, if it isn't Jack Matthews," she said, her voice cool. "What brings you here after all these years?" Jack took a deep breath, clearly reluctant but steady. "I've come to speak with you, Sophia. Things have been tough since my father's death. We lost everything. I've been trying to rebuild." Sophia didn't flinch. She sipped her tea slowly, eyes narrowing slightly. "And what is it you want from me?" Jack didn't waste time. "I came to ask about the agreement my father made with yours. The shares? The company? Is there anything left for me to claim?" Sophia set her cup down deliberately, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Your father's debts consumed everything. The shares were taken by creditors. I tried to hold on to them, but it was out of my hands," she said, her voice almost too calm. "It's gone, Jack. All of it." Jack's gaze didn't waver. "No," he said firmly. "I know there was an agreement. It states that if I marry one of your daughters, I would inherit 50% of the company." Sophia's face hardened, the corners of her mouth tightening as she processed his words. Jack continued, his voice steady, but filled with a quiet determination. "I'm not here to fight. I just want something to rebuild with, and I thought perhaps I could start with the company." For a long moment, Sophia said nothing, the silence thick between them. Then, slowly, she stood up and walked over to him. "Well then," she said, her tone cold yet calculated, "I believe we can settle this in a way that benefits everyone. If the marriage clause will end all this talk of claims, I'll offer you one of my daughters." Jack's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and confusion crossing his face. "Marriage?" he echoed, almost incredulous. Sophia's smile was chilling. "Yes, marriage. You'll work here as a gateman, a position that will provide you with the roof over your head. We'll arrange the marriage later. It's the best I can offer. Take it or leave it." Jack didn't know how to respond. This wasn't what he had hoped for, not at all. But with nothing left, no other choices, he reluctantly accepted. "I just wanted stability," he muttered under his breath. Sophia's voice was colder than ever. "You'll take what I give you. You can either leave with nothing or stay here and accept the opportunity I'm offering." Jack nodded slowly, resigned to the fate that was now forced upon him. He left the room with a tight knot in his chest, knowing that pride would have to wait. The next morning, Emily's world shifted once again as Sophia summoned her to the living room. Emily entered quietly, her hands still damp from washing the dishes, the faint scent of soap lingering in the air. Sophia, sitting with an air of cold command, barely looked up as she spoke. "You'll be marrying Jack Matthews," she declared, her words cutting through the stillness of the room like a knife. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What?" she asked, barely able to process what she had just heard. Sophia didn't bother to repeat herself. "You heard me. He's the son of your father's business partner. There's an agreement. He came asking for his share. I've decided you'll marry him." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. The air around her thickened, the weight of the words pressing down on her shoulders. She could barely comprehend the betrayal. But no, she protested weakly, trying to find some ground, some reason to fight back. But you're the first daughter, Emily, Sophia continued, her voice icy, dismissive. Jane is already taken, and the agreement clearly states that it must be you. This is your father's legacy. You should be proud. Emily's gaze flickered to her stepsister Jane, who sat sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone without a care in the world. Jane looked utterly indifferent, even amused at Emily's shock. Emily's anger bubbled up, but she swallowed it. This isn't fair, she said quietly, as her hands clenched at her sides. You're sacrificing me, she whispered, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. Sophia's eyes narrowed, a twisted smile creeping onto her lips. No, she corrected coldly. I'm fulfilling your father's legacy. It's your duty. Emily stood there, her insides churning. The pain in her chest was like a vice tightening, but there was nothing she could do. You'll marry him, Sophia insisted, as though nothing could be simpler, as though this was all part of some plan she had carefully orchestrated. You'll help the family name. Emily's legs felt weak, but she stood her ground. She had no choice. Not now. Not here. She left the room in silence, her heart shattering piece by piece. Everything she had ever dreamed of, freedom, education, a future, was slipping through her fingers like sand. She had been handed a fate she didn't ask for, a future she didn't want. And yet, she knew she had no choice but to accept it. The days that followed were a blur of quiet tension, a strange stillness that hung over the house like a heavy fog. Jack, now settled into his role as the family's gateman, went through his new life with a quiet determination. Every morning, he woke up at 6 a.m., the sharp jingle of the gate's automated mechanism marking the start of another day. He swept the compound meticulously, though it hardly needed it, his eyes always scanning the surroundings with a sharpness that spoke of someone constantly on guard. The boys' quarters where he stayed was modest, a small, self-contained room with a single bed, a working toilet, and a view that barely caught the sunlight. It wasn't the luxury he had known, but it was enough for now. Emily, on the other hand, went about her duties as usual, her heart heavy with the weight of what had been forced upon her. She couldn't bring herself to look at Jack, not fully. She couldn't forget that this was all part of a deal, her future, now tangled with his in a way she never asked for. Still, she couldn't completely ignore the quiet persistence in his eyes, the way he moved with purpose, fixing things around the house without being asked. He wasn't the lazy, defeated man that some might have expected. No, Jack worked with a kind of quiet resilience, as though the weight of his past had taught him how to survive, how to endure. Even the dogs seemed to respond to him, no longer barking at him from behind the gate, but greeting him with the same respect he gave to everything else. One afternoon, Emily, carrying a plate of food, approached the gate. Jack looked up in surprise, his tired eyes briefly meeting hers. She set the plate on the flat stool by the gate, the quiet clink of the plate the only sound between them. Is this for me? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Emily nodded, her expression unreadable. Yes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Emily took a deep breath, her words soft but steady. I need to make something clear. Jack turned to face her, his brow furrowed. I'm not going to marry you, she said, her voice calm, as though she had already come to terms with the truth. No offense, but this isn't the life I planned for myself. Jack didn't react immediately. His gaze dropped to the plate of food, his fingers brushing over the rice as he nodded slowly. I understand, he said, his voice steady but low. I didn't come here to marry anyone. I came here to survive. His words hung in the air between them, quiet but resolute. I didn't want this either, he continued, his eyes meeting hers again. But arguing would have made things worse, and right now I don't have the strength for that. Emily blinked in surprise, not expecting him to speak so plainly. She had thought, perhaps, that he would argue, push back, or at least show some sign of frustration. But instead, there was only acceptance in his eyes, a resignation that mirrored her own. A long silence stretched between them, but there was no bitterness, no anger, just the understanding of two people caught in a situation neither of them had chosen. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice softer this time. Fair enough? She gave him a brief, almost imperceptible smile before turning to walk back inside, leaving Jack to eat in peace, the quiet bond between them solidifying without a single word more. Days passed, and the silence between Emily and Jack slowly began to shift, though it remained unspoken. Emily found herself watching him more often than she realized. It was strange. His movements, the way he carried himself with a quiet determination, spoke volumes. One afternoon, she returned from the market and found Jack standing by the fountain near the edge of the compound. He was hunched over, scribbling something in a small exercise book, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sight was oddly domestic, and for a moment she hesitated before walking past him. But then curiosity nudged her forward. "What are you always writing in that book?" she asked, her voice breaking the stillness. Jack looked up, meeting her gaze with a slight, almost hesitant smile. "Plans," he said simply. "Plans for what?" she pressed, her brow arched in genuine curiosity. He shrugged, as if it wasn't anything remarkable. "My life goals, business ideas. Nothing big yet, but something to work toward." Emily tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. "Business ideas?" she asked, her voice soft with the question. Jack gave a small nod, his eyes returning to the pages of his notebook. "Logistics and delivery, something on a larger scale. Motorbikes, vans, dispatch riders, a whole system." Emily blinked, a bit surprised by his ambition. "And with what money?" she asked, the skepticism slipping into her tone without meaning to. Jack smiled faintly, his expression not one of arrogance, but of quiet confidence. "None yet," he admitted, "but I'm not going to be a gateman forever." There was something in the way he spoke that made her pause, something that made her look at him in a new light. He wasn't defeated. He wasn't just a man taking orders and doing menial work. No, Jack spoke with a kind of quiet belief that made Emily wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was something more to him than the role he had been forced into. "You talk like someone who still believes anything is possible," she said, half to herself, marveling at the steadiness in his voice. Jack met her gaze, his eyes steady. "I do," he said simply. "Because if I don't, I'll lose what's left of my mind." Emily stood there, processing his words. She wasn't sure what it was that shifted inside her. Maybe it was his resilience, his quiet refusal to give in to despair. Or maybe it was something in the way he spoke about the future with such certainty, even though his present was far from secure. Either way, it made her see him in a way she hadn't before. And as she turned to walk away, she couldn't help but wonder if she had underestimated him all along. As the weeks passed, the quiet routine of the household continued, but a shift was happening beneath the surface. Jack and Emily, once two strangers bound by a forced fate, were now becoming something more. A team, however tentative. Jack's determination to reclaim his father's company and his rightful place in the world grew stronger with each passing day. He wasn't just sitting idly, accepting his circumstances. No, Jack had begun to take action, gathering pieces of the past and meticulously plotting his future. Emily, too, found herself more involved than she ever intended to be. It started with small things, helping him sort through papers, organizing old documents he had uncovered, files that had been buried under layers of time and deceit. But soon, it became clear that their paths were no longer just parallel. They were entwining. One evening, Jack sat at the small wooden table in his quarters, poring over legal documents, when Emily knocked softly before stepping inside. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. She had never expected to find herself here, aiding a man she had once considered a stranger. Someone who had been forced into her life like a shadow she couldn't shake. But as she glanced at the documents scattered before him, she couldn't ignore the growing respect she had for him. Jack wasn't just looking to reclaim his father's legacy. He was looking to expose the lies that had kept him from it. "I've found something," Jack said, his voice steady but laced with determination. "The papers, the contracts, everything points to fraud. They stole everything from my father, and they covered it up when I went to prison. But it's all there. The truth is buried under a pile of lies." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized just how much he had uncovered. She picked up one of the files, her fingers grazing the yellowed pages. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Jack looked at her, his expression resolute. "We go after them. Piece by piece, we expose what they've done, starting with Sophia." The fire in his eyes wasn't just the fire of revenge. It was the fire of someone who had been wronged, who had nothing left but the truth and the will to fight for it. The next few days were a blur of strategy and late-night work. Emily and Jack became partners in this quiet war, digging through the wreckage of a past neither of them could escape. Together, they formulated a plan, gathering every shred of evidence, every contract, every document that could stand as proof of the lies Sophia had spun. The task was monumental, but neither of them hesitated. They knew that this was their only shot at reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. And as the weight of the case grew heavier, so did the weight of their bond. Emily wasn't just helping him anymore. She was becoming a part of his fight, and in turn, he was becoming a part of hers. There were no grand gestures, no promises made, just the quiet, undeniable understanding that they were in this together, for better or for worse. The day of the court hearing arrived, and with it, the heavy anticipation of a long-awaited battle. Jack stood at the courthouse, his black suit a stark contrast to the turbulence inside him. His steps were steady, but his heart beat with an urgency that felt almost foreign to him now. Beside him, Emily walked silently, her modest blue gown swishing gently with each step. Her eyes were focused ahead, but every glance she stole at him spoke volumes of hope, of belief, of the quiet promise they had made to each other without ever saying the words. The courtroom was filled with a hum of whispers, the kind of noise that comes with the presence of something unexpected. Jack had walked in there not as the defeated son of a bankrupt man, but as the rightful heir, as someone who had reclaimed his life and his future. Emily, standing beside him, wasn't just a spectator anymore. She was his partner in every sense of the word. As the case unfolded, the evidence poured in. Lawyer Thomas Blackwell presented signed contracts, original partnership agreements, and sworn affidavits that cut through the air like a sharp blade. Every document laid bare the deception and betrayal that had been hidden for so long. But the true blow came when Thomas presented a voice recording, one that Jack had never heard before. It was the sound of a threatening phone call, a recording made years ago when a man from the rival firm had warned Thomas to keep quiet or lose everything. "This," Thomas said, holding up the recorder for all to see, "is the reason I stayed silent, but not anymore." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. The gasps that rippled through the room were the final nail in Sophia's coffin. Jack didn't speak a word. He didn't need to. The evidence had spoken for him. He had been robbed of his inheritance, betrayed by the very people who should have protected him. As the judge reviewed the documents, the air grew thick with the weight of impending justice. When the final decision came, it was swift, cutting through the tension like a sword. "This court finds that Mr. Jack Matthews is the rightful heir to his late father's company," the judge announced, his voice strong. "The evidence confirms fraudulent activity, and as a result, control of the company is to be returned to Mr. Matthews. Furthermore, the 30% stake in O&O Enterprises, currently under the control of Mrs. Sophia Brooks, is to be restored to him. Additionally, the company is hereby ordered to pay $10 billion in damages or face full forfeiture of assets." The room erupted in shock, the sound of disbelief and admiration swirling together. Sophia's face had drained of color. Her carefully crafted composure shattered. She gripped her handbag tightly, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Jack, however, remained calm, his expression unreadable, as though the weight of the moment had long been expected. Emily, standing by his side, couldn't help but smile softly at him. This was it. The victory they had fought for, the justice they had longed for, was finally theirs. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed, but Jack and Thomas walked past them, unbothered by the flashes of cameras and the shouts of reporters. Emily followed quietly, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite name: relief, pride, or perhaps just the quiet certainty that this was only the beginning of something far greater. That evening, as they sat in the modest bungalow that had become their haven, Emily handed Jack a cup of tea, her smile full of warmth and quiet joy. "We did it," she said, her voice soft. Jack looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting in a rare, genuine smile. "We did," he replied. "But this is just the start." And as they sat together, the weight of their shared victory hung in the air, not as an end, but as the beginning of a new chapter. They were free now, not just from the past, but from everything that had once held them back. Months passed since the court victory, and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. one that neither Jack nor Emily had ever expected, but both were starting to embrace. Jack had assumed control of his father's company, the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders like a well-tailored suit. Fitting, though heavy. Every morning, he stood at the helm, guiding the company with the precision of a man who had been reborn from the ashes of his past. The old board members were replaced by new faces, loyal and eager to rebuild what had been broken. The work was grueling, but Jack thrived in it, his resolve hardening with each new challenge that came his way. Emily, too, had found her place. She had returned to school part-time, picking up the pieces of a life that had been paused for far too long. But she was no longer just a student. She was now part of the foundation Jack was building, helping to manage the administrative side of things, contributing to the company's growth in a way she had never anticipated. They had become a team, each complementing the other's strengths, each relying on the other's determination. There was a quiet power in their partnership, a synergy that spoke louder than words. But even as they moved forward, there was a lingering shadow that neither of them could ignore. Sophia, once the queen of the household, was now a shadow of her former self. Her empire was crumbling, and every step she took was more desperate than the last. The phone calls came daily, creditors knocking at her door, her lawyer no longer returning her calls. The once gilded life she had built was slipping through her fingers, and she couldn't stop it. And then, one afternoon, came the news that shattered whatever was left of her facade. Her daughter, Sarah, walked into the house, tears streaking down her face. "Charles has been arrested," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "He's been arrested for fraud. The Financial Crimes Commission picked him up this morning. They're saying something about money laundering." Sophia's world tilted on its axis. She sat frozen, unable to process the weight of the words. She had once been the woman who made the rules, the one who had controlled the game. Now, she was watching as everything she had worked for collapsed in on her. "Where is he?" she whispered, her voice shaky. "They said he's being held in Abuja. His family? They won't even speak to me." Sophia's power had evaporated. The humiliation was complete. She was nothing now, just a woman grasping at straws, clinging to whatever remnants of her past she could salvage. But Jack, in his newfound strength, wasn't like her. He had no desire to watch her rot, no satisfaction in seeing her destroyed. And so, when she finally came to him, stepping into his office with the weight of defeat on her shoulders, he didn't offer her revenge. Instead, he offered her a choice. "I know I was cruel," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But please, Jack, don't let us fall apart. Help Jane. She's still your sister-in-law. Please, I beg you." Jack didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch as if considering her words carefully. Then, slowly, he stood and walked toward her. "You had a choice too, Sophia," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You could have helped me. You could have kept your dignity. But instead, you humiliated me. You used your power to crush me when you thought I wouldn't rise. I won't make the same mistake." Sophia flinched, but Jack didn't flinch back. "We're not like you," he said softly. "I don't believe in revenge for the sake of it. But you'll have to live with what you did. I won't help you unless you truly understand the weight of your choices." Sophia looked down, her face crumpling in regret. But it was too late. She had lost everything, including her integrity. Jack and Emily had already moved beyond her, beyond the past that had once defined them. They were building something new, something they could call their own. And in that moment, as Jack and Emily stood together, side by side, there was no longer any room for the ghosts of what had been. Their future was theirs to shape, and nothing, not even Sophia's desperate pleas, could take that away.